Welcome. We actually will begin. I'm Mike Wallbacher. I'm the director of the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education up in Roxborough. So glad you're here. This is Thursday Night Live. I don't want to welcome you. It's a new program here, begun back in the spring as a response to the pandemic. In the last few months, we've talked about honeybees, edible wild plants, climate change in Philadelphia, moths, plastic pollution. Last week, we had a tour of our wildlife clinic. We've got some great ones coming up soon, which I'll share in a moment. As I've mentioned a couple of times, so some of you may have heard this before, but if you're new, you'll appreciate this. Amanda Cohen runs our public programming. Amanda's here among all of us. She's here as our Zoom co-pilot. If you're having difficulty with anything technically, any technical difficulties, you can chat to her privately and she will try to help you out. Speaking of which, as I've also mentioned before, I hope you found the chat feature, as that is your opportunity to ask questions of our speakers tonight. So I hope you all have it. And please keep yourself on mute. As you likely know, Zoom is a challenging medium for conversations like this, so your help here is more than welcome. Before we begin the conversation, I actually want to introduce you to the Schuylkill Center, as some of you might be new. And if you are new to the Schuylkill Center, welcome. We're so glad you're here. But I'm going to share. There we go. And Adam, you can see that, right?
Yep.
Yay. So this is tonight's lecture on Roxborough's rivers, river and water. It's our history. Do want to offer that the Schuylkill Center is 340 acres in Upper Roxborough. Our trails are open, 4 miles of trails through a variety of habitats. If you're feeling stressed out, nature is a great way to get unstressed. Just the color green is relaxing on your brain. The chemicals that trees give off are relaxing for your system. Pine, especially, is a smell that lowers your blood pressure. Seeing the fractals in the leaves is actually softening on your eyes. So there are incredible benefits to being out in the forest. So do come for a walk. But not only are the trails open, but also our visitor center is open as well. Of course, you have to wear a mask when you walk into the visitor center, and there's signs and rooms for how many people should be in each room. But nonetheless, the visitor center is open. Would love for you to stop in and come for a walk. So we hope you've taken advantage of us during this time. But the Schuylkill Center was founded in the mid-1960s to do environmental education programming, especially with children in schools. In fact, school field trips are the bread and butter of what we've been doing for more than 50 years now. This is the first fall that we actually have not had schools come to us on field trips. And we've actually been doing some virtual field trips for schools, which is disappointing, but it's odd for us not to have school buses pulling up and having kids coming off and getting lessons with us. In addition to that, we run a nature preschool now in its 8th year. It's the first nature-based preschool in the state of Pennsylvania. So the entire curriculum is taught through the outdoors and nature. And 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds are immersed in the outdoors all day. So it's been an outdoor experience from the beginning. This year is kind of uber outdoor. So the kids are actually coming to school and meeting, and we're using the outdoors as our way to distance ourselves. So the kids are in small groups and they stay far apart from each other. So we run a preschool. We have the most ambitious environmental art program of a nature center anywhere in the country. We're very proud of it with indoor and outdoor exhibitions. There's a new show that just opened this fall in our gallery. Love for you to come see it. The show is called Eco-Tactical, and it was a response to the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. It was supposed to be our April show to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Earth Day on April 22nd. But the world changed. Happily, the show is still with us. So come see Eco-Tactical in our art gallery. We also run the only wildlife clinic in the city of Philadelphia, one of the few in the region. We had a virtual tour last week, treating thousands of injured, orphaned, sick animals of something like 150 species have come, from tiny hummingbirds to massive snapping turtles with cracked shells. So it does really amazing life-saving work. You can be a volunteer, by the way, in our wildlife clinic. So check that out on our website. We do lots of restoration work and tree planting work. Like this was actually 2 Earth Days ago when the Philly Fanatic helped me plant a tree for Earth Day. We're also a membership organization, and our members receive discounts on our programs and in the gift shop. We have great birdseed in our gift shop, by the way. People drive from miles around to get our birdseed. Plus, you also get advance notice of exclusive programs you can join online. So thank you to our members. If you're a member, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Climate change is teaching us new words. On June 3rd, we were hit by a derecho. Some of you may have remembered this storm. It was a monster storm. A derecho was described to me as a sideways tornado. I love that way of thinking about it. It just blew from Reading to the Jersey Shore and almost a straight line. This big front just came through really fast. And it devastated our pine grove, took down 20 of these extraordinary white pine trees that are more than 40 years old. So we have a pine grove campaign to help restore this grove, and we'd love your support if you are interested in that. That would be great. Next week, we're going to keep our history theme going, and I'm going to be giving a lecture. I haven't done it in a couple of years on the hidden history of the Schuylkill Center. Actually, the land under the word hidden is a big chunk. Oh, I'm sorry, no, it's the land behind it. Behind hidden history, look behind it. There's the land that becomes the Schuylkill Center. This is from the 1920s when Roxborough was mostly farmland. That's Ridge Avenue in the foreground, which you can see really well here. But nonetheless, the land that becomes the Schuylkill Center has, on a number of occasions, almost not become the Schuylkill Center. So there was an attempt by the family who owned it to have the United Nations established on our property in the 1940s. Can you imagine what Roxborough would look like if that had happened? And there also was an attempt for, if you know Roxborough well, Cathedral Road would have essentially gone down with the Schuylkill Center's driveway and ended on a bridge that went across to the main line. So it was an attempt to connect Chestnut Hill to the main line on a bridge through Cathedral Avenue that would have gone down our driveway. So I'm going to tell you the story of all these ways and all these parallel universes where the Schuylkill Center does not exist and other things are there. So that's next week, the hidden history of the Schuylkill Center. And the week after, landscape architects named Studio Ludo who research and do designs based on the research about how children play are going to be discussing pandemic play. So if you've got especially younger kids who have been cooped up inside and you're curious about their thoughts on play, how to spread joy, not the virus, would love you to come in 2 weeks on October 29th. Megan Talarowski, the executive director of Studio Ludo, is going to be giving that lecture. She's really fabulous. So recommend that highly. We're here for Roxborough's River and Water, a History. So glad you're all here. And I want to thank our co-sponsors for co-sponsoring tonight. The Philadelphia Water Department has been really wonderful in promoting this. We thank them for that. The Upper Roxborough Civic Association and Friends of the Chalmont Valley, two of the local civic associations. The Schuylkill Center adjoins those two civics. Have been supportive of it, have co-sponsored this too. I want to thank them. I really appreciate their partnership with both of them and really appreciate them sharing the link to tonight with you all. Friends of the Upper Roxborough Reservoir Preserve. It's a friends group that is busily turning the old reservoir that we're going to learn a lot about tonight into a park, one of the newer parks in the City of Philadelphia system. And of course, the Roxborough Manny Young Conservancy, a nonprofit dedicated to greening those two communities. And they do a lot of work on open spaces. So I'm so grateful that they're doing that for us. Also, tonight's lecture is part of River Days. The Schuylkill Center is one of 23 education centers across the Delaware River watershed. The Fairmont Waterworks is another of the 23. We formed the Alliance for Watershed Education to connect people to the Schuylkill and Delaware rivers and all the land that drains them. Watershedalliance.org is their website. There are River Days events still happening. So from mid-September to mid-October is a month of activities called River Days, and go to that website and check it out. So I will stop sharing now. There we go. Give me 1 second. Good. All right. So we have a very special guest with us tonight. So glad he's here and you are here to hear him. Adam Levine has been a historical consultant for the Philadelphia Water Department since 1998, and as such has been researching the history of the city's water system during that time. He's been a frequent lecturer in the region on the history of our city's water system. I am pleased to offer that tonight's lecture is a first, a new lecture for Adam, and I'm so grateful that he accepted this invitation to create the lecture on Roxborough's special connection to rivers and water. Thank you, Adam. I'm so looking forward to this. Adam also has a website, phillyh2o.org. That's phillyh2o.org, where he assembles his work for you to access online. He's also editor-in-chief of GROW, the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society's magazine, and has written 5 books on gardening. Adam, so happy you're with us tonight. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that introduction. I guess I'm going to just start right in, and thank you everybody for 182 people. That's I just wish we were all in the room so I could say hello to all the people I know and you know, meet some new people, but not the way of the world right now. So I'm going to just start right in. And Mike, I apologize if I steal a little of your thunder at the end of my talk, talking about the Schuylkill Center, but maybe you can steal some of my slides for next week, or, you know, depending on how it happens. You know,
you got it.
So let me get. So besides researching the history of the water system, I've also researched the history of the sewer system. That's actually how I started with the water department, was researching the history of sewers. And this is me. 3 times I've been able to go down into a sewer with the sewer maintenance people of the department, and that's been either the top of my career or the bottom of my career, however you want to look at it. And I know it's hard to tell jokes on Zoom, so I'm going to limit that. But that was supposed to be a joke, so anyway. I know I can't hear you laughing or see you smiling or even see you sleeping. So, you know, that's just the way this technology works. So Mike already thanked all the groups that are co-sponsoring. Amanda, is there any way I can turn off the joining? People are joining that pops up and all of that.
Yes, if you click Manage Participants at the bottom, that should make that sidebar go away, hopefully.
I don't see anything at the bottom, but at the top. No, I don't. Participant. Okay.
Yeah, it might be what happens when you become a co-host, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think with the screen sharing, it's probably a little different too. It might not show up the way it normally does without screen sharing.
Okay, I'm just gonna. All right, well that's fine. So what I want to talk about tonight is the history of water in Roxborough, not just as it was advertised, the history of the water infrastructure of the city, but also some of the history of some of the streams that still exist and some of them that don't exist. And that's where the Schuylkill Center comes into this, as you'll see at the end or even at the beginning. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Roxborough, so just to be clear, I'm the only one seeing this thing pop up. It's not popping up on everyone's screen, right?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This thing that keeps popping up at the top of the.
With admitting people.
Yeah.
I think it's just the 3 of us.
Okay, that's
you,
fine.
Amanda, me. Yeah.
All right. This is I'll get used to it. This is maybe an unusual outline of the city of Philadelphia, but since this is sort of a history talk, you know, it makes sense. Roxborough was a township in the original city of Philadelphia, in the original county of Philadelphia. And in 1854, the little tiny city of Philadelphia, which was the 2 square miles we now call Center City, absorbed all the rest of these municipal entities and created the enlarged city of Philadelphia that we know today, 129 square miles. So Roxborough is in the northwest part of Philadelphia, some of the highest elevations in the city. This is an 1843 map showing Roxborough Township. The creek running through the middle here is the Wissahickon Creek, and Germantown Township was adjacent. And between the two of them, they take up that northwest corner of the city. I apologize if some of these maps I'm going to show I'm turning them on end to try to fit more onto the screen. So I apologize if you're trying to stand on your head to read some of the captions. But a lot of the maps, just put in a plug for the Athenaeum of Philadelphia, a lot of the maps and plans that I'm going to show are on a website called the Greater Philadelphia Geohistory Network, philageohistory.org. So you can actually go in and look at these maps in detail on that site to zoom in on them. I tried zooming earlier on Zoom and it didn't really work. So we're just gonna have to look at these maps the way they are. But so here you can see Ridge Avenue, Ridge Avenue running through here, and then in Germantown Township, you have basically Germantown Avenue, in 1843, with the main access to those townships from both of them running into the center of Philadelphia. And the interesting thing, and the Roxborough end of this, is that Ridge Avenue really is on a ridge. It is the drainage divide. It divides the drainage. Everything on the Schuylkill side of Ridge Avenue basically flows into the Schuylkill, all the little streams that you see here. And on the other side, the streams will flow into the Wissahickon. So Ridge Avenue, which some people say is an old Native American trail following along the ridge, which would make sense. And same with Germantown, is basically the high ground through the neighborhood. So here's a Google version of Roxborough, and by calling all of this Roxborough, all of this in this pink line here, I know I'm running into trouble because everybody in Philadelphia is very proud of their neighborhood, and to say that Wissahickon, I know Manayunk is not part of Roxborough, but everything else here, according to Google, is part of Roxborough. When I Googled Roxborough map, this is what I got. So if you're in Andorra, if you're in Wissahickon, or if you're in some other neighborhood you don't like that, that's just too bad. So good. I heard a laugh. So somebody laughed. I don't know if I was supposed to hear that, but that's helpful. So the amazing thing about this, as Mike was saying earlier, and as if we all tune in next week, we'll learn more about it, is, and if you hang on till the end of this talk to learn more, is how green the northwest edge of the city is. Basically, this is the city line here, and you can see all of this green space here, and that didn't have to be that way. You know, green space in the city never has to be that way, especially not about 500 acres of it, which is what we have there. So here's a 1907 plan, bird's eye view of Manayunk, Wissahickon, Roxborough. So already, you know, this person is refuting my claim of this one big neighborhood. And if you looked at this map in detail, this is on the Library of Congress. You can actually download your own copy of this if you want it. Very high resolution. Print out a huge thing to hang on your wall if you want. A lot of things on the Library of Congress are like that. There are all the mills in Manayunk along the Manayunk Canal. The Flat Rock Dam upstream out of this picture would be damming up the river and providing the water for the canal. But if you look over in this corner here, if I go the right way, you can see that when he gets past Leverington Avenue, which is one of the steepest streets in the city, you can see that there's not much drawn in for Roxborough. And you know, there was somewhat of a neighborhood upstream or north of Leverington, and you can see that that's Holy Family Church. I think I got that name right, and if I didn't, someone unmute themselves and correct me. But other than that, I think the artist just sort of ran out of steam. I mean, if you had drawn in all these little buildings that very detailed, you might have run out of steam too and not want to continue drawing it. But the fact is, there really wasn't a whole lot of whole lot of green space there.
Hey, Adam, can I interrupt for one moment?
Yeah,
There's a couple of people who seem to be having a hard time hearing. Can you move a little closer perhaps to the microphone? Is that possible for you?
I think I'm talking. Hold on a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Is this better?
No, that's worse actually.
I'm talking into a head. Is this better?
That's maybe a little better. Yep.
Okay, I'll try to. Why don't I just put the little earbud microphone in my mouth? Can you check and see if that's better for the people who are having trouble hearing?
Anybody want to chime in on chat? On chat? I got a yep.
That's better?
Yep, it's better.
Okay.
Sorry, Adam. Thank you.
No, that's okay. I need to get better technology if I'm going to do this for a living. So to get into the water infrastructure, water's the first and the bulk of what I'm going to talk about. The Philadelphia started supplying water as a municipal responsibility in 1801, and as the city grew, so did the water system. And all told, over the 200 and some years of the city's history, there have been 12 different pumping stations drawing water out of either the Delaware River, the Schuylkill River, or in some cases springs or creeks. In the case of the Germantown Waterworks, it was a small creek, and Chestnut Hill Waterworks was a spring up in Chestnut Hill, where there's still a water tower there. There are only three of those plants left today. The technology has improved to the point where we only need three water pumping stations. Actually, four. One of them is just a pump that pumps the water into the system for the whole city at Lardner's Point, and where the red dot is there. But the other three are the ones that draw water out and put it into reservoirs. So here's a map, and this is what I was saying, that actually there was not a whole lot in Roxborough. This is a 1910 map of the upper part of the far northwest corner of the city, with the Schuylkill River down here. You can barely see, but down here is the Shawmont Railroad Station, and over next to that is the Shawmont Pumping Station. And up the hill, and those of you who know the neighborhood know it's a pretty steep hill up to these reservoirs. You have the original reservoir built in 1869 when the pumping station was built, and then the Upper Roxborough Reservoir, which was built in 1893, which was needed because it was both higher in elevation, and you want your reservoirs to be above the people you're trying to serve, so the water can flow from the reservoir by gravity. So as population continued to expand into higher ground, they needed that reservoir there. The other thing I'll mention later is just, I'll bring this map back later and talk about the streams on it. So imagine that this is not a picture taken in 2010, that this is taken in the 19th century, and that you're coming down Port Royal Avenue. Those of you know the neighborhood, and there's the train station, the Shawmont train station, which is, if not the oldest, one of the oldest train stations in the entire country. So you cross the tracks, you go around, so that's what it looks like looking back. Then you go down this Belgian block road, which was probably there 100 years ago, and you turn the corner, and there is not a derelict building, but a working pumping station. This would have been the same building. The pumping station that was built, the Roxborough water system, let's not call it just a pumping station because you need a reservoir up here to pump water too, was opened in 1869. Here's a back view of that building. There was the pumps were housed in the bigger building here, and then where the smokestack is, that's where the boilers were. And what they were doing, they were burning coal to make steam to run steam engines. And that's why the railroads are here, to bring all the coal in. A plant like this could burn hundreds of tons of coal a month, and the entire system in 1912 for last year, the entire water system in the city was burning like 12,000 tons of coal a year. So huge amount of energy being expended to pump water up into the reservoirs, as well as a huge amount of pollution you can imagine going up into the air. So in the end of the 19th century, the pumping station was expanded with this building on the right to house more pumps. And we don't have any pictures of the interior of this building, but we do have some pictures, one of it being built, of the under construction. And I love these old pictures of construction scenes, because if you were able to zoom in on them, and if you could see how they're building things, what they're wearing, what tools they're using, just every little detail is apparent, because these were scans of 8x10 glass negatives, and it's scanned at a high resolution, so you can zoom in and you can see every single detail on these. And I could spend a whole hour someday, maybe I will, just showing these pictures and zooming in on them. If Zoom would ever allow us to zoom, or when I have a chance just anyway, that was an attempt at humor. No one's laughing. I don't see anybody smiling here. I just see my own face here. So that's how it goes with Zoom. So I will stop lamenting the fact that we're all in our separate spaces. So remember this picture when we get to toward the end of this section, when we show a picture of how this pumping station ended up looking. And what the pipes in the foreground are probably the intake, where they're sucking the water out of the river, and then it would go in. Then it would be distributed to the 5 or 6 pumps that are going to be put here. Yep. Okay, there we go. This was the original pumps that were built in this building, and it doesn't look that impressive until you notice that this is a man here. So these things were huge. We don't have any pictures of the steam engines that were built. And this is a big counterweight that's pulling the plunger up and down and the piston up and down and sucking water in. And so a different kind of pump, but of similar size, would have been something like this that was built for the Queen Lane plant. And again, you can see here's the men standing all over this thing. These things are huge, which is why some of these pumping stations have such high ceilings. There's also a boiler house where they would burn the coal. The coal would be delivered by rail. They would sometimes these boilers had automatic feeders. Other times they had men who would get the coal on these little rail cars and then have to throw it into these boilers, depending on what time period we're talking about and how modern the equipment was. Modern being a relative term here.
Oh yeah, I bet it was hot.
So in the 1920s, the coal throughout the system, starting in the 1920s, these steam engines were abandoned and taken out, and these little electric pumps were put in. And the pumps you're looking at here pumped as much water as probably 7 steam engines. And so they look sort of silly sitting in this huge, high room. But in some of the pumping stations in the water system, they actually cut the roof line down when they put the electric pumps in, because they just didn't need to have all that space. So again, burning all that coal, I'm not quite sure why this picture is here, just to show another view looking up the river at all the smokestacks. The new building is under construction in that picture. And here's what's left. The newest pumping room, the newest engine house, as they called it, was the only building left in 1936. It's the only thing they needed. They didn't need a boiler house because they weren't burning anything. They were getting electricity from Pico. So this is the only building they needed. Here's another view of it in 1961. And if that looks like a derelict building, it's probably because they more or less abandoned it. And I don't quite remember if I talked about that right now. No, I don't. So when we get to the end of this section, I'll talk about what the disposition of all of this various infrastructure I'm showing you is. But this building looks as it was. It was derelict at that point and about to be abandoned. So as I said, when you're pumping water, when you have a pumping station, you need to have an associated storage facility. That in some places that can be a reservoir, it can be a tank, as we have in the system. This is and you want to pump the water up higher than the highest buildings you have in the system, so it can reach that level by gravity. There'll be enough water pressure from the water just flowing downhill. So as the city grew and people moved into higher and higher neighborhoods, and they wanted to provide them not with well water, but with the Philadelphia drinking water, they kept having to build higher and higher storage facilities. And you can see the Roxborough facilities are among the highest in the system. The tank at Chestnut Hill, and then a standpipe in Roxborough, which has been replaced by a tank in Roxborough, which I'll show a picture of in a second, is now the highest, 515 feet above the Delaware River. Excuse me. So these are the two water storage facilities. The original small reservoir of about 13 million gallons, 12 or 13 million gallons, the lower Roxborough Reservoir, and then the 148 million gallon double upper Roxborough Reservoir. And there would have been pipes from the pumping station leading to both of these reservoirs, and sometimes they would fill the lower reservoir from the upper reservoir. The piping system kept changing over time, and I'm not an engineer, so and I don't think most of you are, so I'm not really going to get into a lot of that. But the one thing that all of us can understand is that when you have a reservoir, you need to make sure it doesn't leak. And when they built the upper Roxborough Reservoir in 1893, it started leaking almost right away. So they had to drain it, and they had to figure out what was wrong with it, and then they have to reline it. And again, we have these glass negatives that have these amazing pictures that show not only the workmen and what they're doing, which I don't half understand, but just the size of that reservoir. Any of you who have ever been walking around the now heavily vegetated reservoir along the trail, to me, it's amazing to see what it looked like when it was empty and open without vegetation. Because when these reservoirs were in operation, they didn't want any vegetation, because the roots would get into the brickwork and start destroying it. So, but just again, these pictures, you can zoom in on these and see all the horses and all the clothing that the workmen are wearing and things. But this is just one of the two basins at Upper Roxborough, and it probably really is that long. It just seems so much longer without any trees or trees and no fence even around it. So in 1955, these two tanks were built. The bottom picture doesn't. The one tank is hiding the other. These hold about 11 million gallons of water between the two of them. And again, they were to provide the hot water level in the tallest one is about 515 feet above the Delaware River. So that can reach just about any point in the city with gravity service. And for those of you who know this site and know the ball field that's across the street these tanks are built across the street from the reservoir. People still come here. They maybe not this spring so much, but every year for looks like 60, 70 years, people have been playing sports on the fields next to the old filter plant. Which brings us to filtration. Until 1909, Philadelphians were basically drinking unfiltered water. The water would come out of the rivers, it would sit in reservoirs, the solids would settle out, and then it would be piped into the system. If it was a hot day and there was a big demand for water, sometimes it didn't even sit very long. Sometimes it was almost like pumping it directly out of the river. And that was fine early on, but as the rivers became more and more polluted, as this editorial cartoon shows, all the upstream pollution from Norristown, Hopsville, Pottstown, coming down the Wissahickon Creek, and from all the industry in Manayunk, that became a big problem, a big health problem. And it wasn't so much the industrial pollution, although that certainly was not healthy, but it was bacteria for diseases like typhoid fever that the main impetus for the city to build filtration plants. Starting in this chart represents from 1860 to 1914, by which time not only the filter plants were completed, so everybody was drinking filtered water, but then they were chlorinating it on top of the filtration to make sure no bacteria was getting into people's homes. This chart represents 27,000 Philadelphians dead from this one disease. And typhoid is not usually the disease you hear about when people talk about waterborne diseases. People talk about cholera usually. And cholera only affected the city 3 different times. They also talk about yellow fever, which didn't affect the city anytime after 1820. So typhoid was year after year, you would get these epidemics of anywhere from 400 to 1,000 people dying, and for every person who died, 8 to 10 people got sick. So it was a huge cost in both human life and human productivity. That was actually calculated by one engineer trying to say, look, city, and look, Philadelphia, if you would build these filter plants, it would pay you back just for the human life, the human productivity you would be preserving, let alone the life. So here's the devil or a skeleton posing, dressed up with a hat called the Scoopville, toasting William Penn with typhoid, with a glass of typhoid. Besides the disease in the bacteria and the industrial waste in the river, we were drinking coal dust and water, as this headline says. And I think in this particular edition of the Art Inquirer, they actually reprinted a letter that someone had written with their tap water, which they called Schuylkill ink. All the coal that was being burned was not just in the water plants; it was being burned everywhere, not just in Philadelphia, but all around the world. And these were the anthracite coal mines up in the Upper Schuylkill Valley, were some of the biggest in the country. And these piles of waste that were the result of this would, every time it rained, would wash into the Upper Schuylkill, and slowly that waste, depending on the flood, would wash down into the river. And sometimes it couldn't settle out. Coal waste is very fine, and so you had cartoons like this and stories in the newspaper about people trying to do their wash, and she's not doing a very good job getting anything white with that water, let alone her arms and her apron. So. And the coal waste was such a problem that it not only clogged the river, but it clogged the water intakes. And then it would fill the reservoirs, which are technically called sedimentation basins because the sediment settles to the bottom. So in the 1930s, this reservoir at the Belmont water treatment plant was finally dredged out. If you can read this, it says the mud was 18 feet deep in some places in the basin, which was probably not more than 40 or 50 feet deep. So thank God for the WPA during the Depression to provide the manpower that did all this. Looks like it did a lot of this digging by hand. So just to continue on this little tangent, wasn't until after World War II that finally the state of Pennsylvania decided that the Schuylkill River was worth saving, that it was, otherwise it was just going to become so clogged with silt that nothing could live on it, nobody could boat on it or anything. This was the island or the mound of coal waste that had piled up outside Boathouse Row in Philadelphia in 1954. They worked downstream from the coal regions all the way down to the Fairmount Dam, which is the last impediment in the river that would back up coal waste or any kind of sediment before tidewater, which is below the dam. It's basically tidal. So they took a dredge. They started chewing away at this. They had to remove about 100,000 cubic feet of silt from about the Belmont water treatment plant, where Peters Island is, down to the dam. They built an 11-mile pipeline to carry this slurry of coal waste, and they used it to fill some of the swamplands down by the airport. So this is how a lot of those swamplands around the airport were filled in, either with this kind of waste or with dredge spoils, as they call it, from the Delaware River. This pipe is aptly named the vomit pipe, because that's what it's doing. It's just belching out the waste into this low area, and eventually the water drains away and the area is filled in. So, but mainly for the reason of the bacteria in the water and the fact that the water was actually killing people in real time. Industrial waste will kill you in slow time, give you cancer, but typhoid fever can kill you in a week. So we started, this is the lower Roxborough Reservoir. The site of that is, we started building a filter plant there. And this is the same a little bit farther along at the upper Roxborough Reservoir. They built a bigger filter plant because there was more water coming in there with a bigger basin. And then once they had these places excavated, they started building the filter chambers. And this is the work in progress. This is just the column, and this picture shows the finished filter. With underneath the gravel would be pipes, and on top of the gravel would be sand, and then water would be allowed into this building. I'm not quite sure how. It didn't come in through the top. I know that it somehow flowed in, so it didn't disturb the sand that much, because the sand is what this filter was all about. There was layers of sand, charcoal, and gravel, called the slow sand filter. The water would come in and it would seep through the sand, and it would be collected at the pipes, and when it came out of this filter, it would not have any bacteria in it. This was a technology perfected in Germany, and we belatedly got it. We could have saved thousands of lives if we had just started building these plants 10 years earlier even. But public works take a long time. So finally in 1909, we're able to bid farewell to the devil and his kit bag of diseases: typhoid, scarlet fever, diphtheria, and we have filtered water. It wasn't a perfect system until we began chlorinating that water to really make sure that there was no bacteria. But basically, typhoid fever is not a disease that anybody even hardly thinks about today. And this is a before and after. This is actually at the upper Roxborough filters. Now, just because that water was clear doesn't mean it's safe to drink, but the fact that it went through the filters means that it has no bacteria, and also that all the coal dust that was suspended in the bottle on the left would have been filtered out too. So we had the double effect of not only making the water safe to drink, but making it pleasant to drink. I mean, you could drink that black water, but it's not necessarily what you want to refresh yourself with. So what's left of this water infrastructure? In 2005, what was then called the Roxborough Conservancy, I assume that might be now the Roxborough Mania Conservancy, but I'm not sure. But they issued a report. They lobbied with then Councilman Michael Nutter to try to save the waterworks in Upper Roxborough. And what they meant by the waterworks was both the pumping station, which was still standing, although very derelict at that point, the Upper Roxborough Reservoir to preserve the bird habitat that had developed there in the North Basin where water had accumulated and plants had grown up and waterfowl and other birds had grown accustomed to coming there. And also the Lower Roxborough Reservoir and also the filtration beds, which are abandoned now. The main thing to come out of that was the preservation from development of the Upper Roxborough Reservoir. And with the Friends group, the Friends of the Upper Roxborough Reservoir Preserve, doing a lot of work even before 2010, when the Philadelphia Parks and Recreation took this on its piece of the park system. So that piece is preserved. That's 35 acres, and as I said earlier, with an 0.8 of a mile trail around it. Lots of invasives have been removed. Native plants have been encouraged, and new ones have been planted. It's just a little gem of a piece of parkland. There's an amazing view on a clear day of Center City from the southwest corner of the trail. Also a stormwater management area below it in this corner, and also this area has been filled in somewhat to create a sort of a rolling meadow. But down here, here's the Lower Roxborough Reservoir. So I don't know if any of the Upper Roxborough volunteers have any energy, or if there are any new people who want to take on a new project. But it's a much smaller space, but probably would be equally beautiful. Maybe it could just be a woodland. I don't know. But that's also it's not part of the water department property anymore. It's part of the city's public property. So just waiting for a group of volunteers to take a look at it and see what you can do there. Here you can see over here this is where the old filters were. The reservoir was abandoned, and both filter plants were abandoned in 1962 when technology changed and rapid sand filtration came in and allowed much more water to be filtered much more quickly by just 3 plants. And so these plants were abandoned. The filter beds in the Upper Roxborough are now used for storage, water storage, along with the tanks. And in Lower Roxborough, there was a clear water basin, a filtered water basin that's still used for storage. All told, about 40 or 50 million gallons of water are still stored in the system in Roxborough, pumped there from the Queen Lane station, which is down the hill a little bit, but pumped directly up to these storage areas. So the water department has teamed up with the Upper Roxborough Reservoir group, and we've created a walking tour about 3 years ago. That's one of my favorite work activities, mainly because the volunteers who are part of the Friends group put on such a spread of beer and wine and snacks afterwards. So it's one of my favorite things to do, and I'm sorry we didn't get to do it this year. But we created this walking tour brochure, and if we were all in the same room, I would have a copy for all of you. Maybe we can figure out a way to put this up somewhere or email this to people who are interested. But it goes into more of the history. It gives you stops along the way and explains what's going on. So this is a picture taken in 2011. Every once in a while, the water storage in the old Upper Roxborough filter beds has to be drained, and you can see the concrete has really held up amazingly well, considering this was more than 100 years after the filters were built. Unfortunately, the old pumping station was not saved. I question whether it was salvageable. I guess anything is salvageable. One of the problems was access. There was really no road other than the railroad that went by it. The trail went by. Now you probably get a brew pub in there. That would be, but in 2010, when these pictures were taken in December, that was about the last gasp of this place. And here's the picture of what that engine house looked like. The engines were removed. Graffiti artists had moved in. And in January of 2011, this was demolished. So I'm showing this picture because this was outside that engine house, and I have, and people have asked me in the past, and I expected with all the people here that somebody would ask me about this today. So I thought I would preempt the question and say that I have no idea what this is. So Mike, have I talked long enough? I have a few. I don't want to, since you're going to be doing this talk next week. You know, mine is basically talking about some of the same things. So I might just leave that to you.
Sure. Whatever works for you. Yeah.
But how long have I been talking? What time is it?
It's 7:53, so we typically go a little past 8.
Okay,
So
well, I'd rather have. Let me just quickly go through these just to get this idea in people's heads, and maybe in your head too. So, I give a whole hour and a half sometimes when I'm not roped off the stage, dragged off the stage, lecture about the streams of Philadelphia and what happened to them. So I just wanted quickly to show, again, turning this map on its side, the northwest, from Wissahickon Creek all the way up to the county line at basically just past the Schuylkill Center. There were on this 1848 map, which I doubt any of you have ever seen because only 2 copies of it, and it's an amazingly detailed map of Roxborough and Antioch, but it's particularly Roxborough. Excuse me. But in that stretch from Wissahickon Creek upstream, there were 16 little streams that came down from the ridge and emptied into the Schuylkill River. So if we're calling the streams in the Schuylkill Center first order streams, there used to be about 16 of them that flowed down, and probably more in Fairmount Park farther on. But we're just looking at this right now. So what happened to these streams? Here's just a closer detail of that. Again, I know this is hard to see on the computer screen, but if you can see these streams, especially since most of them are delineated by little valleys. But even in 1848, in the middle of Manioc, there were still probably about half a dozen streams flowing down the hill and through the neighborhoods and into the canal at that point. So basically, all these streams were put into sewers. In this neighborhood, they were put into storm sewers. And here you can see this is a map showing Leverington Avenue, Leverington Street on this map, showing a stream coming down. And when it gets to here, it used to go into a culvert. This is about the 1890s, but the city is going to pick it up and put it into a sewer. Here's the stream coming down. And here's where it gets picked up and put under the street. Because you always want your sewers to be under the street in case anything happens to them. So having this culvert running under private property just wasn't really a good idea in the first place. So, and that's what happened to hundreds of miles of streams in the city, except for these few. And there were plans to put them in streets, but I'm going to gloss over this because Mike is probably going to talk a lot about the Houston estate and this plan even. But it always kills me. I'll just show these two. This is from a plan for the Houston estate, which was this plan. This is the Schuylkill River here. This is the Schuylkill Center and all the open space here. Here's the Upper Roxborough Reservoir, Ridge Avenue, Wissahickon Creek running through here. So all of this suburban development was planned. This is in the 1940s. But today we have all this green space. Oh, attract the top income group of Philadelphia residential buyers. You know, and for some reason they still consider this green space when they put all these roads in here. That's the question. You can go through this whole brochure and you can from an ecological and an environmental perspective, you can take the whole thing apart. It's just, this was done in the 1940s, a promotional brochure. And so today we have this fine scenery, and tomorrow we have these, you know, these things, you know, as including, as Mike was saying, the Cathedral Road Highway that's going to go to Bryn Mawr. So I'll let Mike talk about that. But the good news is that this development plan for the property that is the Schuylkill Center today and Manitouna Farm was not developed. And instead, we have this amazing space, which I really just discovered about 4 or 5 years ago, or rediscovered. I had been there before, but I think when I got involved with the reservoir, I rediscovered the space and started hiking in it. And if you hike down the ravine trail here into along what's called Smith's Run, once you get out of the sun and into the woods, you'll see what all of those 16 streams that were flowing down the flank of Manayunk and Roxborough must have looked like. It's just it's almost a miracle that they survived, but they did. And for more on that, you can tune in next week. So that's the end of my talking. My sitting here talking to myself is how I feel about Zoom. But if there are any questions, or if there, Amanda, if there are any questions that came up in the chat that you want to pass along right now, or however you want to do this,
Why don't you?
I'll share my screen.
Yep. And people put questions in chat, and I'll share them with Adam. There was some chat about the coal being used, the coal dust being used to fill in Eastwick in South Philadelphia, the neighborhood alongside Tinicum. That actually they were actually going to fill in Tinicum Marsh as well, but the marsh was saved by I think a new group that was like Philadelphia conservationists, and they became the Natural Lands Trust. I think is the genesis of Natural Lands Trust actually back in the day.
Yeah.
So Tinicum was saved as a marsh, but Eastwick was filled in, and that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, they began filling in Eastwick in the 20s and 30s when they wanted to build the airport there. So they began pumping dredge spoils out of the river and dumping garbage there and filling it in any which way they could find fill. And when you have a flat area, you don't have anything to cut from. You don't have any hills to cut down, so you have to truck your fill in or pump it in or do something. So.
Yep. You're getting a lot of thank yous, Adam. You're getting a lot of thank yous. Gail wants to know, can you email a copy of the article in the Inquirer on 1999 and the hidden streams?
What we can tell people is I'm going to download this chat.
Yep.
And if our emails associated with this chat, or if people put their emails in the chat, I'll reply to every request for information like that. But yes, I could, if I knew what that article was, I would send it.
Great. Let's see. Oh, how are dissolved metals removed?
Ooh, that's what I was going to ask.
Well, there's a lot of.
Not so much. No.
One of the ways that the water department deals with heavy metals is by keeping industrial waste out of the water supply to begin with. And so, you can talk about, I'm really not, seriously, I'm not allowed to talk about lead, if that's what you're talking about. There is because the mayor's office has sort of taken that over, and there's one person at the water department who goes around and talks to people about lead. And I can, if you want to text me or chat me your information, I can put you in touch with him, and he can answer. Because I just get in, when I start talking about anything after, say, 1970, I get in trouble. 1, because I don't know what I'm talking about. 2, because I'm not an engineer. And 3, because I'm the consultant historian. And I have to get my contract renewed every year. So I hope you all understand that there's certain things I can't talk about.
Michael wants to know, was the original lining of the reservoir, was it clay?
I don't think that one was ever clay. Maybe it was in the beginning, but that might be why it leaked. So there was, if you look at those pictures, they were putting down, I think it was concrete and then brick. And then I think they put asphalt over the brick. So there might be, Rich Giordano, who's right there. Does that sound right to you, Rich? Anyway, he's not arguing with me. He's trying to unmute himself, but he can't figure it out. So but it was not clay. A lot of the older reservoirs were clay lined. Maybe there was a clay lining in somewhere in the mix. That I'm not sure. So.
Yeah, I honestly don't know the answer. I mean, we kind of always assumed it was clay lined, and then that there was other stuff thrown over it when it leaked, which I understand was repeatedly in the early days. So
yeah, okay. Yeah,
but the sides are all double lined with brick.
Yeah.
There we go.
The original.
And for everyone else, Rich is the president of the Upper Roxborough Civic Association and also one of the leaders of the Friends of the Reservoir group. And Tom Landsman, you're here too, one of the other leaders of the Friends group. Tom, do you want to chime in?
The original drawing had bricking and clay, and then it was relined.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Great. I stumbled across the pumping station ruin in its last days, and I thought it was a magical building. It had some really great graffiti inside, so it was very evocative. but it was almost amazing that it was actually there a lot right alongside the river. And when I see your photographs, what I'm realizing is that was a small piece of actually what was all there back in the day. So it was a huge building. But there was I was working for the Lower Merion Conservancy back then, and we did a tour, a walk around the whole river on both sides. And somebody back then, 10, 15 years ago, was trying to figure out how to put a restaurant there. And you would get to the restaurant by a boat from Flat Rock Park in Gladwin.
Yeah.
So you'd hop on because there's no parking alongside that pumping station. They couldn't get parking there. So that was a really novel idea, but obviously never worked out.
Yeah. I bet I know whose idea that was, but
yeah.
Is it Chris Lessling?
No, it wasn't his idea, but it was on a walk that he co-led with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
So any other questions? I mean,
someone comments.
Yeah.
Someone says your garden looks great, by the way.
Oh, okay. I don't know who said that, but thank you.
Are there pipes or drains underneath the ball fields, or is everything outside them?
I think underneath the ball fields, it might be where one of the water storage facilities is, but I'm not sure. I should know the answer to that, but might even be where some of the old filter beds are. But because of the security issues, they really don't want people to know where they're storing water. So I'll just leave it at that. But if someone really wants to know, they can, again, put it in the chat and I'll find out.
Got it. I'm looking through for questions. When did water testing start?
Water testing actually started it's not a question of when water testing started, it's when did they start testing for the right things? They started testing water as early as the 1840s. And we're just basically testing for various chemicals and for suspended solids and things like that. It wasn't until the bacteria were discovered and in the starting with Pasteur and then Koch or Koch or however you pronounce it, Robert. The German scientists discovered bacteria that they started testing for the right things and realized that the water wasn't safe.
Actually, up in this section of Philadelphia, it's high ground, so there are a lot of houses built up high. So the Schuylkill Center had a wonderful Victorian house, 3 stories, 2.5 stories that we called River House that burned down about 15 years ago, sadly. But these houses were built high above the river to get away from the bad air. Malaria literally translates as bad air. So before we had a notion of how germs were, we just thought, okay, it's bad air.
Yeah.
Thomas Shaw builds Shawmont, of course. What do we got? Are there books on Philly's water history that you can recommend?
Not until if you can find it, there's an art museum bulletin from 1988 that talks about the Fairmount Waterworks, but that's just one piece of the history. The woman who wrote that died about 4 years ago, and someone is trying to finish her book, which would be a more comprehensive look at the
Right.
water history, but that's not finished yet.
Here's a question for Richard Tom. Any possibility of ever being able to ice skate in the upper reservoir in the future, similar to how we did in the 60s and 70s?
All depends on climate change, Michael. No,
There won't be
seriously,
ice.
we have pictures of people playing hockey there maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but it hasn't frozen solidly enough for a long enough period for people to go down there and not drop through the ice of the last 2-3 years. So I haven't seen anybody be able to be down there for that period of time.
Right. Right. Let's see. I think we'll go 1 minute more, and I think we'll be good. A couple of comments on where the exact location of the lower reservoir, right behind Chalmont School, essentially, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's still there. It's just a patch of woods, and only when you really get a closer look at it do you see that there's an embankment and there's stairs and there's a fence around it, and you know.
We have a thank you from someone who said, my dad always called those ball fields the filter beds when I was a kid. Now I know why.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think the filter beds are, some of them anyway, are under there.
Yeah. There used to be a skating club on the Schuylkill near Fairmont Dam.
Yeah, the Schuylkill in the Delaware even used to freeze over. There used to be trouble getting ferry boats across the Delaware because of all the ice.
Mm-hmm.
You read Walt Whitman, you know, it's he writes very dramatically about that. And skating on the Schuylkill, you could Google that and Google images, and you'll find all sorts of pictures.
And Flat Rock Dam is due for a facelift too, right? Do you know much about that?
Yeah, until I realized I had about 3 hours of slides, I was going to talk about the canal and about Flat Rock Dam. Actually, the Army Corps just put out a request for public comments on the project that the Water Department wants to do to basically fix the lock, readmit water into the canal so the canal starts flowing again. And then that would also involve fixing the lock at the other end. So it's a long process, but just in early this month, there was an Army Corps request for proposals. I was searching for information online because the Water Department people who were supposed to give me information didn't give it to me, and I found that. So if people are interested in that, I don't know if they'll have public hearings or whether the public comment period is just what they expect. So
right. Yeah, I hope that they do. Yeah. And I was hoping to do one of these conversations just about that project one day in the future as it comes online. There's some good comments on books, Fever, Amity and Prosperity. So check those out. Getting more thank yous. Amanda, would you mind unmuting yourself for a moment?
Sure.
Thank you for helping us out on Zoom all night. Really appreciate it. And also give people comments on what they can do next.
Yes, so thank you everyone for attending tonight. Like Mike mentioned earlier, the event tonight is part of, or it's sponsored, one of our sponsors is the Alliance for Watershed Education, and it's part of River Days, which is a month-long span of programs at different nature centers. So the Alliance has put together a really short survey just as a way to kind of see who is coming to these River Days events. So I'm going to put that survey in the chat. It should take all of 30 seconds. It's optional to fill out, but if you could fill it out, I know they'd really appreciate that, and that just helps with their funding in the future.
Good.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
and Amanda, can I ask you if I don't, you download the whole chat too when this is all over before it goes away?
Yep.
In case I can't figure out how to do that again.
Yeah, that's done automatically. We'll have that. Absolutely.
Okay, and then
we'll
you
have
can
the chat.
send it to me.
Yep.
Thanks.
And we actually, Amanda, we have a YouTube channel, right? You can watch all these recordings.
Yes, and I can put that in the chat as well. And then also we do have everyone's email addresses too. So a lot of this information, like the walking tour pamphlet that Adam was talking about, we could send out via email too.
Yeah. So we're going to continue these Thursday Night Lives into November. Next week, the hidden history. Some of the slides that Adam showed at the end, we'll dive into that a little more. It's a really remarkable story. It's almost a miracle that the Schuylkill Center is there. And then the week after, pandemic play. And then deeper in November, we're giving out the Meigs Award named after one of our founders, to Jerome Shabazz, who's the founder of the Overbrook Environmental Education Center in the Overbrook section of Philadelphia. And we'll be having a conversation that night to celebrate his award as well. Those are a few things coming up on Thursday Night Live. This Saturday, we actually have a restoration work day. We're inviting people to come help us restore our property. Check that out on our website. The Saturday after this, we are having a wellness walk where you can meditate in the woods. We'll sort of do a guided meditations in the forest. So check that out on our website. So lots of programming, schuylkillcenter.org for any of that. So glad you're all here. Adam, thank you so much for this lecture. We really appreciate your time putting it together. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, and thank you, Mike and Amanda, and thank everybody for you still here for coming.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you to all our friends at the Philadelphia Water Department. Really appreciate your help getting the word out about Adam's talk. And thanks to the two civics, the Upper Roxborough Civic Association and the Friends of the Chalmont Valley. Thanks as well to the Roxborough Manningham Conservatives, the Friends of the Upper Reservoir Preserve. Thank you all. Have a great night. Everybody be well. See you. Hopefully see a lot of you next week.
Thank
Thank you again.
Take care.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Someone says Adam's still the best, so you didn't ruin your credibility today.
Good. I was worried. At about 5:30 tonight, I was worried about that.
It's all good. They're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. Hope you can see those.
And please send that to me, that document.
You got it.
Save it as a text file even or something.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to sign off. Thank you, everyone.
Me too. Thank you. And Amanda, thank you so much. Rich, thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mike. Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
very much, Michael.
Thanks, everybody.